Okay, welcome everyone. We're doing a deep dive today into something really fundamental, but often kind of invisible, running the show inside your body. We're talking about the intricate world of hormones and, well, how they dictate your metabolism.
It's fascinating stuff. It's like uncovering this secret messaging system your body uses for, well, pretty much everything. Think of it maybe like an orchestra. All these chemical signals deciding when you're hungry, how much energy you've got, even where your body decides to store fat.
And the material you've pulled together for us for this deep dive looks amazing. It's like a stack of research findings, some surprising insights, and practical notes on this exact topic.
Yeah, we've got a great collection here. Lots of articles, research excerpts that really unpack the science behind these internal signals. It's pretty compelling.
Okay, so our mission today is to guide you through this material. We want to cut through the complexity, pull out the most important nuggets, help you really understand what's happening behind the scenes in your metabolism. Get ready for some genuine aha moments about your own body's signals.
Absolutely. Let's start pulling back that curtain.
Definitely. Let's kick off with the basics then. How does the source material describe hormones? Like, what are they in simple terms?
The sources describe them as chemical signals, basically zipping through your bloodstream. You could almost picture it like a high-tech messaging app, using your blood as the Wi-Fi to send instructions to different parts of your body.
Instructions. What kind of instructions are we talking about here?
Oh, really crucial ones. They're directing things like how you break down food, how you build and repair tissues, getting nutrients where they need to go, and maybe most relevant for us today, how your body actually burns fuel for energy.
Okay, so if these messages are constantly flying around, what happens when they get mixed up? Or, the signals don't get through properly.
Yeah, that's often where the problems start, right? The sources highlight that when messages get missed or the signals sort of glitch, it can show up as those really frustrating symptoms like intense cravings you can't explain, or that kind of persistent fatigue that sleep just doesn't seem to fix. There's even an analogy in the material, the burnt toast theory, for when cells misfire during energy production. It's like your body's trying to make energy, but the process is just inefficient, leaving you feeling drained.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's not just I'm tired. It could actually be a communication breakdown deep down.
Exactly. And speaking of energy, here's a fact from the material that kind of jumped out at me. Muscle cells. They burn 3 times more energy than fat cells, even when you're just sitting there.
3 times. Wow. That's a pretty powerful incentive for building a bit more muscle, isn't it?
It really is. And if you dig into the sources a bit more, you find another huge player right at the start. Did you know your thyroid hormones alone control something like 40% of your baseline calorie burn?
40%. Just from the thyroid. That's nearly half your resting metabolism right there.
It really gives you a sense of scale, doesn't it? How much these chemical signals are doing constantly behind the scenes.
Okay, let's zoom in on one hormone that gets talked about a lot, especially with blood sugar and energy.
Yeah.
Insulin. How does the source material describe its role?
Right. Insulin. It's made by the pancreas, and the source is painted as your body's blood sugar bouncer, essentially. So after you eat, especially carbs, glucose levels go up in your blood. Insulin gets released to manage access, helping your cells absorb that glucose for energy. It's kind of like giving cells access to a Netflix binge, Energy just streams right in.
But the material also flags something called insulin resistance. What's going on there?
Ah, yeah. This is where the cells start kind of ignoring the bouncer. They become less sensitive to insulin's signal. So the pancreas has to work harder, pump out more insulin just to get the glucose into the cells. This leads to higher blood sugar levels sticking around in your bloodstream, and often that excess glucose gets stored as fat instead.
And the sources really emphasize how common this is becoming.
They do. I think one source mentioned something like 88 million Americans having prediabetes, which is basically the state where their bodies aren't using insulin effectively.
88 million, wow.
Yeah.
And the key takeaway for you listening, the sources suggest, is if you've ever felt those sharp energy crashes after eating. This insulin inefficiency might be silently happening in the background. And over time, this resistance really impacts your ability to manage weight and dramatically increases the risk of type 2 diabetes down the line.
It really highlights that those energy roller coasters aren't just like inconvenient. They could be a sign of this resistance starting.
The material also looked at those communities known for longevity, the blue zones. What did their diets tell us about insulin?
What's fascinating there is the emphasis on their high fiber diets. The sources show that fiber helps prevent those really sharp spikes in blood sugar after meals, which means you don't get those dramatic insulin surges. It keeps energy levels much, much steadier throughout the day.
So fiber's kind of helping the bouncer do its job more smoothly. Makes sense. And the sources give a specific warning, too, about hidden triggers.
Yes, a really crucial one. Watch out for hidden sugars. Things that seem healthy, maybe like some flavored yogurts or even granola bars, they can pack a surprising amount of sugar. And that triggers those unwanted insulin spikes, kind of sabotaging your efforts to keep things stable.
That's definitely something to keep an eye on. Okay, so if insulin is managing blood sugar after you eat, there's another hormone that tells you when you've actually had enough, right? Leptin.
Exactly, leptin. The sources call it your body's internal check engine light for hunger. It's produced mainly by your fat cells, and its main job is to signal your brain, hey, we're good here, you can stop eating now. It's really key for signaling fullness and regulating appetite.
So if I find myself reaching for that midnight snack, even when I know I'm not truly hungry, could that be a glitch in the leptin system?
It could potentially be, yeah. The sources point to that exact scenario. Your brain might just be ignoring leptin's signal, leading you to eat beyond what your body actually needs.
They mentioned a really powerful historical example in the material, the Minnesota starvation experiment.
Yes, that one's quite striking. The researchers saw that when the participants had extremely low leptin levels because of the severe calorie restriction, they became absolutely obsessed with food. It just powerfully demonstrates how fundamental leptin is to regulating that hunger drive.
And just like insulin resistance, there's something called leptin resistance.
Precisely. It's the same idea. This is when your brain basically stops listening to the leptin signal even when levels are high. The sources often link this resistance to things like chronic inflammation and even high insulin levels. It's like they're interconnected. So when your brain becomes deaf to leptin, your body genuinely thinks it's starving, even if your fat cells are screaming, "We're full!"
Wow. So trying to fight intense hunger or cravings with just willpower in that situation, it might be like trying to turn off that check engine light just by staring at it really hard.
Exactly. The sources are pretty clear. Willpower alone isn't really enough to overcome this kind of hormonal miscommunication. It's a physiological issue, you know. It needs addressing at the signaling level.
Is there anything practical the sources suggested to maybe help with leptin sensitivity?
Yeah, there is one interesting practical tip mentioned, adding more crunchy vegetables like celery or carrots to your diet. The source suggested this simple act, the crunchiness, might actually help reset leptin sensitivity a bit and curb that urge to overeat. It's a small behavioral tweak, but potentially impacts a complex signal.
Interesting. Crunchy veggies. I can try that. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about a hormone most of us are, well, maybe all too familiar with, especially these days. Cortisol. The stress hormone.
Right, cortisol. It was originally designed for those, fight or flight moments, like encountering a predator, as the material highlighted. It gets you ready for an emergency, primes you to act fast.
But now, our predators are more likely to be deadlines or, traffic jams.
Exactly. That's the problem in modern life. This emergency response gets triggered by just persistent lower-level stressors. Cortisol's metabolic role is to quickly raise your blood sugar. It provides this fast energy burst, mainly to your muscles. Great if you actually need to run away, less helpful if you're just stuck at your desk feeling stressed.
And what happens when those cortisol levels stay high pretty much all the time because of chronic stress?
Yeah, this is where it gets problematic. The sources really emphasize that elevated cortisol significantly increases body fat, particularly around the belly area, visceral fat. And it creates this nasty feedback loop. Stress leads to higher cortisol, which leads to more fat storage, which itself can sometimes increase stress or just make you feel worse about things. They even referenced a study showing workers with consistently high cortisol ate something like 35% more snacks than their colleagues who were less stressed.
Oh, wow. That snacking study is so relatable. You feel stressed, you reach for the snacks.
It connects directly to those stress-eating urges, doesn't it? But the good news is the sources offer some really actionable stress management techniques, specifically aimed at lowering cortisol. The 4-7-8 breathing technique is highlighted. Inhale calmly for a count of 4, hold your breath gently for 7, and then exhale slowly and completely for 8.
That's a classic simple technique, easy to do anywhere. And they also gave us permission to eat dark chocolate.
Yes. In moderation, though, studies cited showed dark chocolate seems to be more effective at lowering cortisol than milk chocolate. But the key word is definitely moderation, like a square or 2. Not the whole bar, which would probably just spike your blood sugar and maybe stress you out for different reasons.
Okay, noted. Moderation it is.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's talk about the hormone that signals when it's actually time to start eating. Ghrelin. The sources called it the stomach growl DJ.
That's a pretty good name for it. Ghrelin is primarily produced in your stomach, and its levels rise when you're hungry, prompting those unmistakable growls, and then they drop off after you've eaten.
And the sources point out that not getting enough sleep really messes with this DJ, huh?
Oh, big time. It throws the whole system off kilter. The material notes that even just one night of poor sleep can raise ghrelin levels by about 15%. And this doesn't just make you generally hungrier, it specifically increases cravings for those high-carb, often high-sugar snacks.
So being tired doesn't just make you feel sluggish, it literally makes your body crave junk food more.
Precisely. Your hormones are nudging you towards quick energy fixes. And here's another, maybe surprising, finding from the sources. Even actively dieting, so consciously restricting calories, can significantly spike ghrelin. Levels can jump by like 24% during calorie restriction, which leads to that really intense hunger that makes sticking to a diet feel incredibly difficult, right? It's a biological drive.
That totally explains why dieting can feel like such a constant battle against sheer hunger sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we keep the ghrelin DJ from spinning out of control?
Well, some strategies from the source material include starting your day with a really protein-packed breakfast. Apparently, it's a tactic used by Navy SEALs to manage hunger during long, demanding missions.
A breakfast, okay.
Yeah. And also, just being aware of other triggers beyond sleep deprivation is key. Things like artificial sweeteners and, again, high stress levels, they can also impact ghrelin release.
It really does feel like all these hormones are talking to each other constantly. Okay, let's move on to one that acts like your body's master energy switch. Thyroid hormones.
Right, your thyroid gland, that little butterfly-shaped gland in your neck. It's essentially your body's metabolic thermostat. And like we touched on earlier, it controls nearly 40% of your resting metabolism, just how many calories you burn simply existing.
And the sources highlighted a specific thyroid hormone, T3, as being particularly important.
Yes, T3 is often described as being like a personal trainer for your cells. It signals them to work harder, to get moving. It significantly boosts your metabolic rate by helping convert food into usable energy more efficiently. It basically gives your whole system a bit of a rev up.
So it follows that if the thyroid is sluggish, if it's underactive, everything just slows down.
Exactly. The sources explain that with an underactive thyroid, or hypothyroidism, it's like that thermostat is turned way down. Your metabolism just kind of crawls. This leads to that pervasive fatigue, often feeling cold, and frequently weight gain, even if your eating habits haven't really changed much. Your body just isn't burning fuel efficiently.
The material listed some specific, sometimes kind of sneaky signs of an underactive thyroid. What were those?
Yeah, they listed 7 key things to watch out for. Feeling cold all the time when others seem fine, noticeable hair thinning or loss, persistently dry skin, constipation, unexplained muscle weakness, that really frustrating brain fog where you just can't seem to focus, and a deep fatigue that isn't resolved by getting more rest.
And this issue is particularly relevant for women, isn't it?
Yes. The sources really emphasize that. Women are disproportionately affected, something like 8 times more likely than men to develop thyroid issues. And this is often linked to hormonal fluctuations throughout their lives, like during pregnancy or menopause.
Are there dietary ways mentioned in the material to help support thyroid health?
Absolutely. The sources recommend including iodine-rich foods. Iodine is absolutely essential for making thyroid hormones, so they suggest things like seaweed snacks, wild-caught cod, organic plain yogurt, and pasture-raised eggs as good natural sources.
Okay. And what about all those metabolism-boosting supplements you see everywhere? What do the sources say about those?
Yeah, the sources are generally quite skeptical about those. They suggest many are just ineffective fads, really. The real sustainable change comes from supporting proper hormone function at a cellular level through balanced nutrition, managing stress, good sleep, the fundamentals, rather than just relying on some unproven pill.
Good advice. Okay, now let's touch briefly on hormones that physically shape us more obviously. The sex hormones, estrogen, and testosterone.
Right. These play a huge role in determining where your body tends to store fat and where it builds muscle, contributing to those typical differences in body shape between men and women.
So estrogen's primary influence for women, what did the sources say?
The sources show estrogen generally tends to direct fat storage towards the hips and thighs, leading to what's often called a pear shape. However, as estrogen levels naturally decline, particularly during and after menopause, fat storage tends to shift more towards the belly area. And this shift, unfortunately, increases the risk profile for things like heart disease and type 2 diabetes. Hormone replacement therapy, HRT, is mentioned as an option discussed in the sources that some women consider to manage these shifts.
Okay. And testosterone. Mostly associated with men, but important for women too.
Exactly. Testosterone is absolutely crucial for building and maintaining muscle mass. Men naturally have much higher levels, which is why they typically carry more muscle. But women also need it, just in smaller amounts, for muscle health, bone health, energy, and overall well-being. It's not just a male hormone.
How can you naturally support healthy testosterone levels according to the sources?
The material really highlights resistance training. So lifting weights, using resistance bands, body weight exercises. That's a powerful way to boost and preserve muscle mass, which directly supports healthy testosterone production in both men and women. They also list specific foods like oysters, famous for zinc, eggs, and spinach, which are packed with nutrients that are beneficial for testosterone health.
It's so clear how much diet and exercise weave through all these hormonal pathways. Let's look at just a couple more specific hormones mentioned in the sources. GLP-1 and PYY.
Ah, yes, GLP-1. It's described in the material as the leftovers hormone. Funny name, but it makes sense. It's released in your gut after you eat, and it sends signals up to your brain saying, okay, we're getting full now. It also slows down digestion a bit and helps regulate insulin release, all contributing to that feeling of satiety.
And this is the hormone that's gotten a lot of attention recently with some new weight loss medications, right?
Exactly. Some of the newer medications work by mimicking this hormone's action, making people feel fuller sooner and longer. But the sources also make a point of noting that certain foods can naturally enhance your body's own GLP-1 levels. They specifically mention fermented foods, things like kimchi, sauerkraut, kefir.
Interesting. So eating fermented foods might actually help you feel fuller naturally.
That's the idea, yeah. Supporting your body's own satiety signals. And PYY is another hormone working alongside GLP-1 in the gut.
Yes, PYY is another important appetite-suppressing hormone. It's also released by the gut after you eat, sending similar stop-eating signals.
And the sources offer a really simple, actionable tip related to PYY. Did you catch that one?
I think so. Was it about taking time to eat?
Exactly. They suggest taking at least 20 minutes to eat your meals. This apparently allows PYY enough time to actually be released and travel to the brain to signal that you're satisfied. It can help prevent accidentally overeating just because you ate too fast.
That's such a straightforward piece of advice, but with a clear hormonal reason behind it. Love that. And another warning about artificial sweeteners popped up here too.
It did. Similar to their potential effect on ghrelin, the sources warn that some artificial sweeteners might actually interfere with PYY release. So paradoxically, using them might leave you feeling less satisfied and potentially hungrier than if you'd used a little bit of a natural sweetener or none at all. They suggest opting for things like honey or maple syrup, again, in moderation, if you need sweetness.
It really hammers home how these seemingly small daily choices sweeteners, eating speed, have these potentially powerful ripple effects on our internal chemistry. Let's broaden out again now. What are the big everyday factors the sources point to that really affect this delicate hormonal balance overall?
Well, the sources describe things like diet and exercise as acting like invisible hands constantly tweaking your body's hormonal dials. They have a huge impact. And the contrast they draw between, say, highly processed foods and healthier whole food options is really stark. Processed foods are even described quite colorfully in one source as zombie hormones because they seem to disrupt normal hormonal signaling so much.
Zombie hormones, wow. But the Mediterranean diet is highlighted as a hormone hero.
Absolutely. One study mentioned found that adopting a Mediterranean-style diet improved insulin sensitivity by a pretty remarkable 30%. And specific components get called out as hormone heroes, like olive oil for its fantastic anti-inflammatory properties, fatty fish rich in omega-3s, which can help lower cortisol, and leafy greens packed with magnesium, which is super important for managing stress hormones.
Makes sense. Was there anything in the material about when you eat, beyond just eating slowly?
Yes, the sources mention something called the 12-hour eating window trick. The basic idea is to try and confine your eating to a 12-hour period each day, say from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. or whatever works for you. This gives your gut and your hormonal system a decent break overnight, which can help recalibrate responses. It's sort of like giving your system a mini reboot each day.
Interesting. And exercise, we know it's good, but did the sources specify if different types of exercise affect different hormones?
They certainly did. The material noted that high-intensity interval training, or HIIT, can be particularly effective at improving insulin sensitivity, sometimes even with relatively short workouts. Yoga was highlighted for its calming effect and its ability to lower cortisol levels, which we know is important for stress management. And resistance training, like lifting weights, was specifically recommended again for boosting testosterone and, crucially, preserving that metabolically active muscle mass as we age.
Okay. Were there any other sort of science-backed helpers mentioned in the sources before we move towards wrapping up?
Yeah, a few interesting ones. Turmeric, or rather its active compound curcumin, was mentioned for fighting inflammation, and we heard how inflammation can be linked to things like leptin and insulin resistance. Cinnamon got a nod for its potential to help balance blood sugar levels, and ginger was noted for soothing digestion, which is really crucial given how many important hormones are actually produced or influenced by the gut. Oh, and they also doubled down on skipping those trendy detox teas, basically calling them ineffective for any real lasting hormonal change. Focus on the foundations.
Right. With all this complexity, though, how can someone listening actually get a clearer picture of their own hormonal health? The sources framed it like running a diagnostic on your body, didn't they?
Yeah, exactly. Your body gives you signals, right? Persistent fatigue, unexplained weight changes, intense cravings. Those are kind of like your body's check engine light coming on. The sources discuss different types of at-home tests that can potentially give you a starting point, a glimpse under the hood.
Like testing cortisol levels.
Yes, saliva tests are mentioned as being quite good for tracking cortisol fluctuations throughout the day since it naturally rises and falls. Blood spot tests, those finger prick tests, can give you a snapshot of things like thyroid hormones, TSH, and sex hormones, sort of like a weather report for your metabolism at that moment. And urine tests can sometimes look at estrogen metabolites, which might offer insights into how your body is processing estrogen. An example given was Everlywell, which offers tests covering some of these markers like cortisol, testosterone, and TSH.
And for someone considering one of these tests, were there any tips in the material for getting more accurate results?
Definitely. They advised women, for example, to avoid testing during their period if looking at sex hormones. Days 3 to 5 of the cycle are usually considered ideal for baseline readings. And a general tip was to skip coffee right beforehand, as caffeine can temporarily affect blood sugar and stress hormones, potentially skewing the results a bit.
Good practical tips. When do the sources suggest it's really time to move beyond maybe at-home testing and definitely talk to a doctor or a healthcare professional?
They listed 5 specific red flags that should prompt a professional medical assessment. One was unexplained weight changes, especially a significant loss or gain, like 10 pounds or more in a month without trying. 2, fatigue that's so severe it feels like you're walking through peanut butter, as one source put it, just debilitating. 3, significant or sudden hair loss. 4, sharp and frequent blood sugar swings feeling shaky, dizzy, irritable. And 5, persistent symptoms of high cortisol, like routinely waking up with anxiety around 3 a.m.
Those sound like clear signals to seek help.
Right.
What would a doctor typically look at first in terms of testing?
Usually a standard blood panel is a common starting point. They'd often focus on thyroid-stimulating hormone or TSH levels to get a handle on thyroid function. The material mentioned a typical ideal range is often considered somewhere between 0.4 and 4.0 MIUL, although optimal ranges can be debated.
And it's probably worth reiterating that point about women's thyroid health again here.
Absolutely. It's so important because of that statistic mentioned earlier. 1 in 8 women will develop a thyroid issue at some point. The sources really drive home the idea that sometimes identifying and addressing an underlying hormonal glitch can be far more effective for improving energy, mood, and managing weight than simply trying to battle the symptoms or restrict calories even further. It gets to the root cause.
Okay, so after diving into all these incredible messengers, insulin, leptin, cortisol, ghrelin, thyroid hormones, estrogen, testosterone, GLP-1, PYY, wow, it's a lot. What's the big takeaway for listeners wanting to feel more in control?
I think the core idea that comes through is that these hormones are like your body's silent, hardworking backstage crew. They're making the whole metabolic show happen every single second. And keeping them in sync, supporting their communication pathways, is absolutely key to feeling your best, having steady energy, and maintaining a healthy metabolism.
And the sources offered some pretty concrete steps people can start taking to support that balance, right?
Yeah. They did. They suggested things like trying a simple 3-day reset meal plan focused on hormone-friendly foods. Think salmon and sweet potatoes for those anti-inflammatory omega-3s, maybe a spinach omelet for magnesium, a kimchi bowl for that GLP-1 gut boost. Simple, targeted foods.
Simple, but based on the hormonal science we've been talking about. Makes sense.
Exactly. Another clear goal mentioned was aiming for that baseline of 150 minutes of moderate weekly exercise, just finding something you enjoy and sticking with it. And for managing cortisol specifically, they proposed a quick, maybe 10-minute daily routine. Practice that 4-7-8 breathing. Try to step outside for some sunlight and genuinely find something to laugh at each day. Laughter is a powerful stress reducer.
Laughter is a hormone booster. I absolutely love that. Were there any final, maybe surprising boosters mentioned?
Yeah, a few fun ones. The sources listed things like incorporating occasional cold showers, apparently nature's quick energy and mood boost. Adding a sprinkle of cinnamon to your coffee to help with blood sugar balance throughout the morning. And simply dancing, just putting on some music and dancing like nobody's watching, was suggested as a joyful way to positively influence your hormones and overall well-being.
This deep dive has really just shown how incredibly complex, yet fascinatingly interconnected our hormonal system truly is. It's not just one hormone acting alone, is it? It's this whole symphony playing together.
Absolutely. And understanding these chemical messengers, even just a bit better, really gives you powerful insight into what your body might be trying to tell you with its signals. And crucially, how your daily choices can either support or potentially hinder its natural balance.
So here's a final thought to leave you all with today. Consider how your daily habits may be that late night snack you reach for, the stressful email you find yourself dwelling on, or hitting snooze one too many times instead of getting enough sleep. Consider that these aren't just simple choices. According to the material we've explored, they are direct conversations you're having with this intricate hormonal system, constantly shaping your metabolism, your energy, your mood, your overall well-being. So the question is, what small change could you make today, maybe even right now, to start improving that conversation?